So welcome everybody, thanks for coming. We may have some more people straggling. Thank you for helping set up extra seats for them. So this is Deborah Gonzalez, and she has come to help us understand some of the legal aspects of sanctuary, and also to talk about the, hey, come on in. Are you coming here, Nancy, or are you going to, okay.
Hi, Nancy.
And to also talk about the executive order on immigration, so we have a better understanding of what that means. So, would you take it?
Hi, good evening. My name is Deborah Gonzalez, and I am the director of the Immigration Clinic at Roger Williams University School of Law. I've been teaching for about 5 years now. Before that, I was in private practice. And before that, I was a paralegal, and I worked for very many years, almost my whole adult life, in a law office that does immigration work. So this is certainly something that I have a passion about, something I enjoy doing for a variety of reasons. But I was asked today by Kathy, is it okay to call you Kathy?
You can call me Kathy.
That I speak to you about sanctuary. What does it mean to be a sanctuary church, a city? Why are we talking about this at all? And so I guess it seems logical to start this conversation, and please let's make it a conversation. So if you have questions in between, let's stop, because we're a small enough group. So why are we talking about this, and why are we even here? Like, what's the purpose of this conversation? And I mean, you know, logically, the reason we're all here is because we have a new administration that is not, or has proven to be tough on immigration. Might say it nicely. And so, what this administration has done and had promised to do was to deport everybody who is here illegally, to be able to fix our immigration system, and they were going to do that also by way of building a wall at the border, and this is the way that they're going to fix immigration. So there's 3 executive orders that have come out. I don't plan to speak to them in any detail, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I will just briefly tell you what they are. So the first one I'm sure you all heard of is what we're calling the refugee ban, which is not allowing refugees from certain countries and or foreign nationals who are from predominantly Muslim countries to come into the United States. And that also reduces the number of refugees that are able to come to the United States to a total of 50,000 from what was originally, under President Obama, 220,000. And that executive order also halted all entries from people from 6 predominantly Muslim countries. I'm probably not going to remember all of them now, but Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, and Syria. Not Iraq, Iran and Syria. Thank you. Iraq was in the original order that was taken off. There was a lawsuit under the first order, and then the Circuit Court in the Ninth Circuit issued a temporary restraining order. The administration then reissued another order in, I believe, early March. There has now been another temporary order on this new order, so for right now, that executive order is under litigation. And as I understand it, refugees have been able to come back in under those temporary restraining orders. The second executive order, and they're not in order by the way they were signed, right? Because the refugee order was actually signed last. The other 2 orders were signed first. And so the other order was what they call the border security order, and that order actually talks about hiring 10,000 new ICE officials, Immigration Customs Enforcement officials, who are going to be manning the southern border of the south of the U.S. with Mexico, and also building a physical wall that would be between our southern border and Mexico. That order talks about, or orders for more money for us to find the funding in building this actual wall, for us to use materials that are made in the United States primarily, for us to hire 10,000 more ICE officers, in addition, for us to hire and or put in judges that can sit in detention facilities to hear asylum cases. So if a foreign national were to come in, and if they believe that that foreign national is in fear of going back to their home country, this order orders the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, really, to have judges housed at these detention facilities so that they don't have to transport these detainees to court. And then the third order, which is the order that we're really talking about here and why we're even here tonight, is the order that has to do with public safety in the interior, right? Enhancing public safety in the interior is the title of that order. And that order speaks of what priorities immigration, customs enforcement, ICE is going to use when they are detaining people. And so under the Obama administration, the enforcement was first to start off with criminals. So criminals who had serious crimes, and the crimes that they discussed under President Obama was more, you know, drug dealers, rapists, really significant either violent crimes or drug crimes as they related to drug trafficking. Yes?
Are these people who have been convicted,
Yes.
but not just charged?
Not just charged, convicted, yes. And in fact, the immigration laws for crimes such as these requires an actual conviction for, not necessarily for the deportation proceedings to occur, because they can deport anybody who's here undocumented, but certainly to make them a priority, that was the reason why, right? Because this person had committed a violent or a very serious crime, they've been convicted of it, we don't want them here, let's get them out of here. And so that was the priority, was those people. And then the priorities moved a little bit down based on the crimes that had occurred. So then if you were a violent felon, or if you had committed drug trafficking or arms trafficking or terrorist activities, you were number one. And then it kind of went down to, you know, if you had more than one crime of what we call crimes of moral turpitude, such as shoplifting or, you know, fraud of some sort. So if you had 2 convictions, again, of those crimes, then we would go after people like that. So welfare fraud could have been one of them, right? Not a violent crime, but a crime nevertheless. And then they went down to people who already had removal orders, who had crimes, and then it went down, and when I say removal orders and crimes, I mean removal order and a crime such as operating without a license or driving while impaired. So, right, those crimes that are not incredibly serious, but nevertheless considered crimes where a person would have gone to court and been convicted. And then, you know, the lowest priority really were those folks who had been living here for a certain period of time who were undocumented.
When you say crime, are you talking felony? Or
No, I'm talking any crime.
Okay.
So, for example, a driving while impaired is a misdemeanor in Rhode Island, not a felony. And although driving while impaired is not the kind of crime that would render somebody to be deported, because it doesn't cause deportation. So say, for example, somebody had a green card and they committed a DUI, driving while impaired, that would not cause that person to be deported. Neither would an operating without a license, right? Which in Rhode Island is no longer a crime, I just want to make that clear, but used to be back in 2015. So they changed that in 2016, so it wasn't until 2016 that that now became a civil offense. But for somebody who was here undocumented, who under the Carcieri administration, for those of us who remember, under that administration, the program 287G, which is a program wherein local enforcement and federal enforcement kind of join forces and give the power of immigration laws to local enforcement to arrest people. Under the Carcieri administration, we had 287G in Rhode Island, and many state police officers, in fact, would stop people for operating without a license. God knows why they stopped them, but and then bring them over to immigration. So, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. So that was the priority under Obama. Under this administration, the priority is changed, in as much as they now say, under the order, that anybody who is a criminal is now going to be deported and they're going to be top priority. But the difference is that now the word criminal includes everyone who's ever violated any law, including immigration law, even though immigration law is not criminal law. Immigration law is civil law. There are civil offenses, they're not criminal offenses. But now under this administration, they define anybody who's violated even an immigration law, which would mean entering the United States without papers, to be considered a criminal. And now that person has been given top priority for deportation. The order also gives top priority to people who have been here since 2015. So if you've come in 2015-16, those people are now top priority for deportation. Now, I'll say that and preface that by saying that even under the Obama administration, when the government considered that there was and I say this very specifically, right? When the government considered that there was an influx of people coming in 2014-15, under the Obama administration, they considered those people to be priorities too. So even if it was just a mother and a child coming in and they had come in 2015, under the Obama administration, that person was a priority for deportation as well. So I don't want to make it seem like that wasn't already the case. Yes.
Question. Those crimes, if you will, or misdemeanors that were not originally classified, well, that they're calling them criminal now, is that legal for those people who had offenses that previously were considered civil?
Well, so they're calling them criminals, not charging them criminally, right? So there's a difference, and this really has to do with how is immigration prioritizing the people that they're going to detain.
So if they go to court, they go to a civil court, not a criminal court.
For immigration purposes, correct. Yeah. But there's no need that the person actually have ever gone to immigration court to be considered a criminal under this executive order. All they needed to have done to be considered a criminal is to come across the border without proper documentation.
So they're not legally criminal.
Correct. Right? When you and I think of a criminal, first thing we think of is our Constitution, we think of probable cause, we think of having your day in court, innocent until proven guilty. That's not what this is. This is not that, right?
So
this is saying you're a criminal because you came into the United States without proper documents.
So that says everybody who's here without papers is guilty of that.
Correct. That's what that says, right? Even if you came in with proper papers, and I was listening to a report on MSNBC the other day that said that 40% of the people who live in the United States undocumented are from Asia, and they came in with lawful papers. I'm sorry, it's 60% because 40% of that is the Latinos that are coming in. So the majority of the people that are here undocumented are really people who have come in on lawful visas and now have overstayed. Not necessarily the people that are in South America, Central America crossing the border.
So that makes them criminals also.
Yes, yes, except when, if they were to be stopped, it's unlikely that an Asian person would be stopped more than a Latino person, right? Because when people think of illegal immigration, the first thing I think that comes to most people's minds is not the Asian guy, but it's the Mexican guy, right? So people aren't thinking of that Asian person or the Irish person or the Italian person or the Swedish person, right? Right? Anybody who's blonde and blue haired, that's not who we think about. We think about the dark-skinned person. So this executive order really has changed what that priority is, and as a result of that, now that has become the forefront. Yes.
Can you talk just a little bit, so I don't want to totally derail where you're going, but what it means to be priority for deportation? Because I think a lot of people think you pick someone up and they're criminal and you put them on a plane and send them back, and it's that
Oh,
easy.
okay.
So can you talk a little bit about what that,
So yes.
why they aren't all priorities?
So when I say a priority, I mean that if there were two guys standing in, a police, well, let me not say that, if there were two guys that were being arrested, the guy that's got the criminal conviction will probably be the one who will be detained, and ICE will give that person more attention to try to make sure that they're into the process. And they'll probably detain that person and not let them go free, whereas the person who's here undocumented but never really had any kind of criminal contact as we think of criminal contact that person would hopefully, maybe, be just processed and told to show up at an ICE office to report and let go with the promise that that person is going to follow up with court. So when I say priority, I mean that immigration, ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement, is really going to be focusing on that person to try to get them out of here.
Does this executive order flatten all of those priorities into like equal,
Into one.
equal access? Okay.
Right. So that if anybody came in contact with immigration, whether or not, as long as you're here undocumented, you can be detained, right? And that's what this order does, and that's the problem with it. Is that even if under this order, and so once the order came out in January, in February 20th, Secretary Kelly issued a memo in support of that order, right? Because he's got orders that he's got to comply with. And one of the things in that order is that he ordered that the Department of Homeland Security write rules for comment, for publication and comment, for us to change the amount of time a person can be in the United States for expedited removal. So expedited removal means that somebody who comes at the border, so Joe Schmo is at the border, ICE officer sees him there, Joe says, I have no papers, ICE officer says, I have authority to deport you right now. If you have no papers, sign here, you're deported because you don't have proper papers, I'm deporting you now, right? No right to an attorney, no right to go to court, no right to nothing. The law allows that because that person is at the border and the Constitution hasn't hit. Doesn't protect that person, right?
How does this deal with children who are born here to undocumented mothers?
How do you mean in question?
Well,
Does it matter? Is that your question?
no, I mean, how does this order apply to children born in the United States whose parents are undocumented?
Children who are born here are U.S. citizens per our Constitution, right? So our Constitution says that if you're born, hi Bill, that if you're born in the United States, that you're going to be a United States citizen, no questions asked, right? So long as you were born in our territories.
Right.
The mothers who are here undocumented still fall under the same order, even if they have a U.S. citizen child, right? Immigration doesn't care whether or not they have a U.S. citizen child. So that child is not going to get deported, but imagine that you have a child who's 5 or 6, whose mom is now deported, whose mom leaving the baby with, right? Mom's bringing the baby. So essentially that child has now been deported, although we probably, and proponents of the order would probably say they're not being deported, they're just going with mom, tough luck, mom's deported. I mean, I don't see it that way. It's just a matter of interpretation, I suppose.
Have they left the DACA, the children?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The DACA children?
So are they going to be deported? Is that
Yeah, where are they in this schema?
They're not, right? So DACA hasn't been touched by the president yet. So any child who's come to the U.S. As a child who is eligible to receive DACA and in fact has DACA hasn't been touched by any of the executive orders that have been issued. So as of right now, those kids can continue to apply for DACA, to renew DACA if they have it. I personally am not advising people who have become eligible recently to apply because I don't know what's going to happen. So even if they're granted DACA now and then 6 months from now there's an executive order, now that child has now given all of his information to ICE and we don't know what they're going to do. But for right now, if they already have DACA and they need to renew, I'm advising go ahead and renew because they already have your information. The only time I would change that is if they've changed address. So if I had a child that came to me and said, I have DACA, when I applied last time I lived at X address, now I live at Y address, should I renew? My answer would probably be, probably not. And or leave it. I mean, my advice would be no, but then everybody needs to make their own decision, so it's really a weighing game. Yes?
Yeah, back on this civil
Is this
and
one?
criminal.
Yes, it's good.
I don't think that a civil crime typically be a person being arrested. So does, I may be wrong with that, but civil crimes typically, the conduct and if are not arrested, does the executive order supersede?
No, so our Constitution allows, our Constitution enumerates specific rights for the federal government, right? Under Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, right? President, judicial, executive. Executive, judicial, legislative. And so under the 3 articles of our Constitution, there are enumerated rights to give these 3 branches of government certain rights over the entire nation. But our Constitution was written in such a way so that we would have dual sovereignty, right? Federal as a nation, and then we would have state sovereignty. And so policing is actually a state duty. Anything that has to do with our lives are generally rights as they relate to states. And so policing specifically is a state, is not an enumerated right under the federal law, and therefore if it's not enumerated under the Constitution, it is a right that is left for the states. So even if the federal government wanted, even under this executive order, if the president wanted to say something like, every municipality has to report to immigration every person who is undocumented or has committed a crime, that would be unconstitutional. It wouldn't be allowed. It would be a violation of the 10th Amendment.
So are you saying that someone who is undocumented, that's a civil crime, and is in this building, that ICE does not have the authority to arrest them? Is that correct?
They only have authority to arrest if there's a warrant.
Okay.
So there needs to be a warrant by a judge
A
for
state
the
judge?
arrest of the
A state
person.
judge?
No, federal
A
judge.
federal judge.
Right, because immigration laws are federal laws. So we've decided as a nation that immigration is going to be left for the federal government. ICE can come to this church so long as they have a warrant signed by a judge that names that particular person to say we are here to arrest that person.
But my understanding is that in order to enter the building, they have to have a search warrant. A warrant to arrest does not give them access to
If
enter the building.
They don't know. So as long, if they know that the person is in this building, so long as they know that the person is here, they have the warrant to arrest that person, they don't need a search warrant to come into the building. They only need the warrant to arrest, and so long as they know the person is here. Now, if they come to the door and they say, we have reason to believe that so-and-so is here, but we need to search the building because we're not sure, then they would need a search warrant, right? To search the building to see who's here. But if they know that that person is here and they have a warrant for the arrest, then the church has to really allow them to come in by order of the court. Yes.
Typically, what's the criteria for the warrant that a judge would need?
Well, so for immigration purposes,
For them to come to the church and take somebody away?
they just need to know that the person is not a United States citizen and that they've been living in the U.S. without papers.
That would satisfy a judge.
That would satisfy an immigration judge to issue a warrant like that, or a federal judge, yeah. Right, yes.
Kelly's order, excuse me, suggests to ICE people that they can deputize local police to be agents of ICE in
It suggests
removing people.
that what they should do is that they should really be encouraging the states to join this 287G program so that they can deputize local enforcement to enforce immigration laws. And I just want to make clear, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to deputize these local enforcement agencies? It really means that you're giving that local enforcement person authority to act under all immigration laws. That means identify, investigate, arrest, charge. So this is a police officer who may be a police officer in Johnston, and I won't say province because we know our mayor's not doing that here, but in any other city where this police officer may have training to detect crime, but how do they have training to detect when a person is undocumented, and what sort of training do they normally get? And so it's problematic. It's problematic because the training that they get, imagine that an ICE officer goes through 6 months of training for them to become an ICE officer. and that a local enforcement officer might go through 8 weeks of training. So there's a discrepancy there, right? What exactly are they missing? What are they not getting in terms of training? And don't we as a community have the right to know that, right? If our elected officials are going to say, we want the state of Rhode Island to become a 287G state, don't we have the right to know, wait a minute, what exactly are you doing? Because if I'm a US citizen and maybe I'm a little more tan in the summertime, maybe I'm going to get picked up. I mean, it's things that we need to think about as a community, yeah.
It's my understanding that Kelly's order also suggests that people who come from Central America across the Mexican border should simply be returned to that border, and if they have a hearing, they're talking about having it by video across the border from the US. How do you have legal representation in a situation like that to defend whatever rights you may have?
That's a really great point. So yeah, so the executive order, right, does that. And so Kelly in his memo enforces or puts the executive order into action, which is to say that people who come across the border, who are placed in removal proceedings, everybody now who comes across the border, everybody, whether you're a minor, a child, a minor or a child, right, of course, a mother and a child, a male, a whole family, an elderly person, does it not matter who you are. If you are crossing the border now, you will be detained. They will no longer allow any sort of release at all, so there will be detention. During that detention period, they will determine whether or not this person has credible fear to go back to their foreign country. The reason we allow for credible fear interviews is because we are a signee of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And as a signee, we have promised that we will not send people back to countries wherein they're being persecuted for whatever reason. So by law, we have to give people credible fear interviews, right? Determine whether or not they're really afraid to go back because of some persecution that might have occurred in their home country. But under the executive order as we have it now, everybody is being detained. The issue is where are you going to put all these people? There's no bedding. There are not enough detention facilities at the southern border for them to detain people. Even if they were to move people nationwide, there still wouldn't be enough people to detain everyone. Especially because the order calls for detention during the entire process. So the alternative then is to send them back to Mexico. That's what the order says. We'll send everybody to Mexico and we'll set up some video conferencing in Mexico. But what if the person's not from Mexico? Right? Not everybody that's coming from the southern border is from Mexico. And Mexico has no authority, nor do they want to, take these people in. So Mexico certainly isn't going to accept somebody from El Salvador to live in their country undocumented while they're going through this immigration hearing. That's never going to happen. And you're right, there is not going to be representation. Who's going to be able to afford an attorney to go to Mexico? And then what attorney is going to want to go live in Mexico while this hearing's going on? I don't know.
As one who was active in the original sanctuary movement 30 years ago, we discovered that no matter how good the asylum case was, the federal courts would not ever grant asylum if they came from a friendly nation.
Yeah.
Is that still true?
So I don't think so. I'm not going to answer.
It would be wonderful if it wasn't.
I can't answer for what's going on the southern border, because I know that our immigration courts here in New England are much more lenient than immigration courts on the southern border. For example, I know, generally speaking, domestic violence asylum cases where there's domestic violence in the family, you ask for asylum based on that. In the New England area will generally get approved if you can meet your burden. Not in Texas. Yeah. So it's really amazing to me as an attorney that if I'm able to meet my burden here, with the same facts, I wouldn't be able to meet my burden in Texas, and how can that be? If I'm meeting my burden, isn't the law the same everywhere, and so why is this different? It's different because a lot of it is based on the discretion of the judge. So I can't say to you that I've experienced that, because I would be lying if I did, but I do know that things are very different on the courts in the southern border than they are here, and I do hear that we are much more liberal in our decisions as they relate to asylum cases than is going on in the southern border.
Is there a limit as to how long someone can be detained?
No. So a person can be detained while they're in removal proceedings to the extent that the removal proceedings are going on.
Years?
It could be, but they don't normally go that way. So people who are in removal proceedings who are being detained are what we call the fast track. So that person will get a hearing, so the hearings work like this. A person who is detained at the border, let's say anybody, right? Person gets detained at the border, they figure out that they're not a US citizen, that they're going to be, that they don't have proper papers to live here, and they figure out then that the person has credible fear to stay in the United States, and the ICE officer then says, okay, well, we're going to detain you, but we're going to allow you to fight and apply for asylum while you're being detained. So within a couple of weeks then, a hearing will be had probably to determine whether, well, no, because that person is not entitled to bond, so no bond, right? So within 2 or 3 weeks, then that person will have their first hearing with the immigration judge. Immigration judge will ask the person their name, do they admit that they're not from the US? Do they admit that they didn't have proper papers? Do they admit that they are deportable? Person needs to admit or deny those allegations. And then the person says, okay, yes, I admit all those things, but I'm going to apply for asylum. Another hearing, I'll get to in just a minute. Another hearing will then be scheduled for that person to send their application in. So the judge will say, I'm going to allow you to apply for asylum. We're going to reschedule this for a week or 2 for you to file your application. Now think about this for a minute. If you're filing for asylum, you need evidence to prove that you've been persecuted in your home country. If you're being detained, how are you going to get that? That's a little difficult. So you really need a lawyer and hopefully some family who are on the outside who can help. So within a week or 2, you have to file your application. The application then gets filed, and usually within a month or so, the hearing is scheduled. So it's not an incredibly long period of time because we want these cases to move because we can't house these people, right? We're paying for housing and food and medical, and all of that is something we're paying for. I think the issue that we're going to start seeing is that even that fast track docket is going to get slowed down significantly if you're detaining everybody. Because now everybody's on that master calendar hearing and everybody's filing for asylum. And that's why the executive order also calls for having judges to be housed at these detention facilities so that these hearings can go on a little quicker and so that these people aren't being housed. But there are cases where, people may be detained, especially after the removal. So let's assume that Joe Schmo came in, he's been detained for 2 months, he had his hearing, it was denied, and now he needs to be deported. It may be another 3 months before they can put him on a flight. So you're talking probably about 6 months that we're housing.
So far, we're talking about Central and South Americans.
Mostly.
What about Syrians? What about,
If they're detained, it would be the same process.
but they're not put on a bus to Mexico or Syria? Where are they?
Well, so now they're being detained, right? And so the issue with detaining those folks who already have removal orders is whether or not the home country is going to accept them back, because there needs to be travel papers. And so when we deport anybody, the home country needs to say, okay, we'll accept that person back. Here's the passport, here's the travel documents.
And if they don't?
Then they're here. That's what's happened with Laos and Cambodian countries.
Living in detention?
No. They eventually get released. So they can be detained for up to 90 days. ICE can detain until somebody actually files a petition. But again, resources is what's at issue here. This is all about money. Where are we getting the money to house the people? Where are we getting the money to build the detention facilities to house the people? And after we house them, where are we getting the money to keep them there? Because then we need officers, and we need to buy food, and we need to make sure that they have medical, and we need to pay the heat, and we need to pay, maybe they don't provide the air conditioning, but, so all of these things cost money. So generally, they won't hold them if they already have a removal order for more than 90 days. But if that person commits a crime, then they have to be arrested again, they're going to be housed again, and figure out whether or not we can remove them. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess, yes.
We dealt solely with asylum cases. We didn't cross anybody who didn't have what we felt was a credible asylum case. And we did check in their hometowns. We had connections all over
That's
Central
awesome.
America. It was fantastic. But one thing we learned was that the feds, they would ask the State Department,
Yeah.
what
What the conditions are.
danger was this woman in? And the State Department would ask the officials in that country who never told the truth.
Of course.
And that was the evidence that the feds brought. And very hard for any asylum seeker to actually counter that kind of evidence
Of
coming
course.
from our State Department.
So I don't know, I don't know when your group was working on this, but it sounds like it was fabulous work. I know that today the Department of State actually puts out country reports on atrocities that are happening in various countries, and every country has a country report. Amnesty International, which I believe is still in business, also puts out reports. And there are various other NGOs, non-governmental agencies, organizations that put out reports on country conditions. So that doesn't happen as much anymore because now we have all of these NGOs and we have, even the State Department puts out these country conditions as to what's going on. So it's difficult. I know when I do an asylum case, I always submit a country condition, so long as it benefits me, of course. And then they can't really. But I think the biggest thing that I find in asylum cases is if I don't have an expert to testify as to the conditions, I'm always going to have a harder case than if I do have an expert. So, yeah.
What do you make of Kelly's order to charge parents who have their children brought across the border to unite their family again, to charge the parents with trafficking?
So and this is what I encounter every day as an immigration attorney, right? I see people all the time who have their kids come. And the kids are coming most of the time because of poverty and gang violence. Which is a lot of the things that I believe we as a nation caused, right? From back in the 60s and the wars that were going on in Nicaragua, and the wars that were going on in El Salvador and Guatemala. We did that, and yet we have never really done anything to fix it. And so now we have all of these mothers and these children who are being persecuted by these gang members to do all of these horrific things, and these mothers are panicked. And kids die in Guatemala on a daily basis, I think so much so that it's the culture in Guatemala that when somebody dies, it's not as significant as it would be for us here if we were to hear about somebody dying because of gang violence, right? When we think, or when we hear on the news that somebody died because of gang violence, we're immediately horrified as a community, we're sad, we're mad, we want the police to do something. That doesn't happen in those countries. And so to say to a mother or a father, we're going to charge you criminally because you brought your kid here who was trying to flee violence is just completely against, I think, humanity, I don't know, morals, Christianity, if they're, if they believe in that. I just don't see how that's beneficial. Who does that benefit exactly? Because if we're charging them criminally, now here we are detaining another person, housing another person, we're backlogging our criminal courts even more because now we're charging this person criminally. If that person's going to go on probation, now we have to hire another probation officer. It's just, the way our criminal system works here, I think, is completely. Yes.
Do you see any avenue by which the United States might accept some of the people from the countries in the Middle East that have been flooding into Europe?
It would have to be the refugee process. I mean, there's that's the best process there is. I think significant vetting goes on there. And the United States only takes 1% of all refugees worldwide. 1%, that's nothing compared to what Turkey has taken on or what other countries have taken on, Kenya.
50,000 a year or something like that?
Now under the this administration, we're only taking in 50,000. Dorcas International, which Bill and I are board members, has already taken in 34,000 this year?
This year, yeah, but last year we were close to 100,000
Yeah.
in the U.S., and our numbers here were going up as well.
Yeah. So, you know, we're, you know, a couple of months or so, and we're only in March. So, and new numbers don't come out until October again, but if in October it's only 50, all of those people that have waited already, you know, 4 or 5 years in a refugee camp are now just gonna wait longer. And we don't even take that many people, so it's not like, you know, we're housing all these refugees, because that's just not happening, if people know what the numbers are.
The question about charging parents for trafficking and the whole current administration tenor strikes me as being not only draconian, but having a second agenda, or the first agenda, of self-deportation and self-regulation. You know, if people are going to be charged for trafficking their kids to get them out of the hands of the gangs in Central America, it is a terrible, terrible dilemma, but it may keep the U.S. border folks from having to deal with kids brought in with coyotes or put at risk of their own lives. And that seems to me to be a very plausible purpose of the way in which this is being mounted and broadcast.
One of the fallouts, according to NPR, is that 40%, there's been a 40% reduction in students trying to come to the United States to study.
And
we've lost a staggering number of
people wanting to come. I think what I would say to that, Bill, is I agree, oh gosh, so I don't agree with charging people criminally even when they send their kids through coyotes. I think as a parent, and I'm speaking not on a legal sense, but just as a person, right, as a mother of a child myself, it's got to be very difficult for a parent to see your child leave your home. And it's got to be difficult for you to leave your child. And so if a situation arises wherein, you know, your child calls you one day and says that they're being beaten up by gangs because they don't want to traffic the guns, versus, you know, you bringing your child here with a coyote, I think as a parent we would probably make that decision. But I think where I have the real issue is with the mothers that are actually coming in with the children, because now those mothers are also going to be charged, right? Because now they've trafficked their own child into the United States. And so that is, what's a mother to do? So if you're fleeing domestic violence, say, which a lot of women do, because domestic violence in these Central American countries is prevalent, it's culturally accepted, it's the norm, and they flee with their children because maybe they and their children are being beaten by the partner or whoever the family member is, I just don't see that that's humane that we do that. So we've completely gone off topic of sanctuary cities. Yes?
I'm trying to get back to sanctuary a little bit.
Okay.
A married couple, or a couple, one of which is undocumented, the other one is legal, and they have kids. What right does the undocumented parent have, if any?
So, it's possible that the documented parent, depending on what kind of document they have, right? So if you're saying to me that the documented parent has a green card, then that documented parent could probably petition for his or her spouse, so the undocumented parent presumably, if they're married, assuming they're married, I'm assuming that's the case. Legally married. Yeah. But even if they're not legally married, they could get married and then this all could happen. You know, the documented, the lawful permanent resident could petition for the undocumented person, but the problem is the wait period. Because, so our immigration system is based on preference. And we give priority to people who are spouses, parents, or children, minor children, of United States citizens. So those people get preference. No quota number, no limitation of the number of visas that are granted for those folks.
And what are those again?
So those are parents, children, or spouses of United States citizens.
So the green card
is not a United States citizen, right? So they would fall under our quota system.
Okay.
So we give 480,000 visas per year worldwide. And we give them based on priorities of what your relationship is to the person who's documented or the US citizen. So for example, the adult child, someone over 21, the adult child of a United States citizen gets first preference under the quota. So 480,000 visas are granted for everybody in the world, right? Except for those people who are what we call immediate relatives. Relatives, spouse, parent, or underage child of a United States citizen. So the adult child of a United States citizen now gets preference, right? But that adult child, if they're married, now their preference goes from first preference down to like a second preference, right, or a third preference. And then we give second preference to spouses and minor children of lawful permanent residents. So if you're in your scenario, right, if the spouse is a lawful permanent resident, the other one's undocumented, they're going to fall under the second preference. The problem is that under the second preference, the wait period could be upwards of 7 years. Right, so, right, because we give only 480,000 visas per year, and out of those 480 visas, we give preference to those immediate relatives. So if there's 200,000 immediate relatives, that means everybody else in the world is only going to get the 200,000 visas that are available, and then everybody else is waiting. And I'll give you an example. A brother of a United States citizen is the fourth preference. But if you're from Mexico, India, or China, or the Philippines, if you're from the Philippines, you're waiting 30 years before you come to the United States as a brother of a United States citizen. So when people say wait in line, you know, this whole wait in line, you gotta wait in line. It's ridiculous. How are you going to wait in line? The wait is so long that you're going to die before you make it.
Is that what type of visa is that
for permanent residents? Yeah. Yeah, there's a variety of non-immigrant visas that are given to people so that they can be here for a temporary period of time. But you have to have applied for that. You can't have ever come in. If you came in undocumented, you can't have ever overstayed a visa. So the moment you overstay a visa, you may not be given one ever again, possibly, depending on the period of time. Like if you applied for one, let's say 2000, you overstayed, and now you're going to apply again 2016, they're going to consider that overstay back from 2000. So the chances of getting the visa again are less likely. Right, because you overstayed that visa.
Let's apply this to sanctuary again. I think what I hear you saying is that any undocumented person married to an American citizen could probably be given, and with American children probably could be
Yes.
made an argument for it. Let's put it that way.
They could petition. So here's the issue that faces many undocumented people who are married to United States citizens, is that those undocumented people came in illegally, right,
Yes.
without
Yes.
papers. So the law states that anybody who has entered the United States undocumented and who has overstayed the United States for more than a year is now going to be prohibited from ever coming to the United States for a 10-year period.
Even if they're married to an American
Even if they're married to a U.S. citizen.
Wow.
So what does that require them to do? It requires them to either leave and be out for 10 years or to apply for a waiver, right? So that sounds great. I'm going to apply for a waiver, everybody gets the waiver. No. Waivers are granted to folks who can prove that they have a relative, be that a parent or a spouse, who's either a lawful permanent resident or a citizen, who will suffer extreme hardship if that person is not allowed to come back to the country. So extreme hardship is generally something that they will consider in a totality of the circumstances, but for issues that generally arise out of deportation. So for example, if you say to me, well, you know, they're going to suffer because now the wife or the husband isn't going to have the love and affection of the spouse. Well, that's part of deportation. If you say to me, but they're going to suffer because the wife or the husband isn't going to have the income from the other spouse. Well, that's a part of deportation.
What is it?
Right. What is it? Yeah. Exactly. So you're supposed to provide, and when attorneys file these, the totality of the circumstances. And, hopefully the person has been seeing, some sort of psychologist who can speak to the psychological and social effects that deportation causes on families, especially on children. But the problem with that is that children are not a qualifying relative.
Right.
So the hardship to the child doesn't count,
It's only the spouse
or the parent.
or the parent.
Right. So it's not the easiest thing to get, especially if your U.S. citizen spouse is the one that works and does everything, which is likely the case, because they're the ones who are the citizen.
Right.
So if anybody's going to suffer hardship, it's the undocumented person. They're not easy waivers to obtain. So there is a way of doing it. And when I was in private practice, I don't do it as much at the clinic. I should start doing it. I've been considering it. But I know that a lot of private law firms do a lot of waivers. I know that my husband at his law firm does a lot of these waivers. And, God's good and we've been successful, but they're not easy cases to win.
Now, if we were to try to define the criteria of a person that we were willing to give sanctuary to, it sounds like there's no category of undocumented person that has a reasonable chance of not having a warrant by ICE against them, or if there is, what category would it be?
I think that when you're thinking about becoming a sanctuary organization, you need to be thinking, this is going to sound very selfish, right? Because I think it seems like everybody in this room are like-minded people and we all want to help these immigrants.
Yeah.
And so, as human beings, I think we say to ourselves, we need to help everybody, right? I know I wake up every day thinking that. But then you need to prioritize what you're doing, and then we also need to preserve ourselves, right? Because if I can't save myself, I can't save my brother. And so what is it that you can do as an organization so that, number one, you're not violating any law, because you certainly don't want to be doing that. And at the same time, trying to help those folks who need help. So there isn't a term for the word sanctuary. I think you've all heard that probably more than once. There's no definition for what a sanctuary anything means, other than to say that it's going to be a place where you're going to be protected, right? What that protection looks like is defined by each individual organization or city or whatever it might be. Whether that means that you're actually going to bring a person to live in this facility, whether that means that you're just going to, if while they're here, you're not going to let immigration just come barging in the door and do a sweep of the place, right? Whatever it is that means for this organization. Keeping in mind that there are federal laws that prohibit harboring and concealing and smuggling people into the United States illegally, right? So there is federal law that says that you cannot, no one, not just a federal or state agency, but no even individual person can conceal, harbor, or smuggle a person into the United States if you know that the person is here undocumented. So,
But just the term harboring.
the term harboring has never been defined by Congress. And so they have left that to the circuits, to the circuit courts to define. Our circuit has not yet defined it. And so some circuit courts have defined that as, providing a place to stay. Some circuit courts have defined that as providing transportation, helping them get a false document, sheltering them. Some circuits have said just helping a foreign national in any way, but then also hiding them from immigration officials might be harboring. So really, in this circuit at least, don't know what harboring would be, right? I think our closest circuit that has decided this is the Second Circuit, and they have said that harboring is holding the person, and I want to speak clearly, so if you don't mind, I'm going to cheat. Okay, so it says They've defined it as substantially facilitating a foreign national to remain in the United States illegally and preventing the authorities from detecting the person. So that two things, right? So substantially helping the person to stay in the US illegally and preventing the authorities from finding that person. So if ICE were to come into your building and say, we know Joe Schmo is living here, we have a warrant, and Joe Schmo is hiding in the closet, and you didn't say anything, possibly under the Second Circuit, you could be convicted of having committed a harboring criminal offense. Keep in mind that these charges are criminal. That means it requires reasonable suspicion before there can be probable cause for a warrant, so that then there can be a criminal charge, right? So these are criminal offenses that would require all due process under the law for the person actually committing this harboring crime.
And so who's the person in this scenario? There's no,
Because
it's
it's an
unclear.
organization.
The person who,
It could be the organization.
It could be the organization.
It could be, yeah. I'm not exactly sure who they were
Or the
arrested.
governing
was
board.
there? They would have to charge each one of them individually, I think. But I think that if I were the attorney in a case like that, my argument would be if, let's say you 5 are the governing board and none of you were present, and the church is the one harboring and they're charging you individually, I would probably argue you weren't here.
But if we voted to allow this to happen,
Well, remember that if this were the way that the First Circuit were to define harboring, which we don't have a definition in this circuit yet, but if this were the way that the First Circuit were to define that, it would require you to not only facilitate that that person continue to live here and also harbor the person, right, in the United States, and it would require you to do that, not just the organization. So that means that you personally would have had to have stopped that person from going through the building or telling him, or allowing him to go into the closet.
well, I'm confused a little bit. If somebody from ICE comes with a warrant and says, you're harboring a fugitive, and let's say there's somebody in the building that we are taking care of, allowing to live here, if we deny this, then we are misleading authorities in this. That would be, my understanding is there are 4 elements to harboring a fugitive.
Right. I'm going to cheat again,
Okay.
if you don't mind. So, the foreign national has to have been in the U.S. illegally. The person who's concealing the foreign national has to be actually sheltering the foreign national and concealing the foreign national in the United States. The person who concealed needs to have known or knew in reckless disregard, of the fact that the foreign national entered illegally and overstayed, and that the person's conduct to conceal was in an effort to facilitate the foreign national to remain in the United States unlawfully.
This is talking about foreign nationals. Let's say ICE has a warrant for a specific person. We don't know as long as they have a warrant for a specific person, the person is here, and we try to keep ICE out.
You've now,
We're in violation.
you're in violation of law.
Yeah,
If there is a warrant, you have to let them in.
exactly.
Could you say, I see the piece of paper?
Yes.
And I am going to
I would insist.
call my attorney, and if you would just wait right here and keep your eye on all the doors, that's fine. But I'll have my attorney here in 2 hours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Can I see the warrant?
Yeah.
Is it the name of the person that they're looking for, right? Is that the person that you know to be here? Is it the same person? And you want to make sure that maybe there's a date of birth on there?
Now, what if following Bill's example, let's say we get to the ICE, we delay ICE at the door, we hold them off, and we go for our attorney, but at the same time, we tell the fugitive,
To leave.
there's somebody here,
Still.
now we're committing a felony and telling him to leave.
Yes.
but if they.
Mary, you're gonna be the guy at the door, though. That's
Not likely.
You can't
No.
have him leave,
Yeah.
yeah. He has to stay.
And what if somebody, not realizing all this, just lets them in?
So, right, it needs to be knowing or with reckless disregard that there's, that the.
No, let's the ICE folks in.
If the.
You're not breaking the law then.
No, because you let them in. I mean,
So
you
then
might
they
be,
come in and they're-
the foreign national's not gonna be very happy about it, but,
But, I mean,
yeah. They need to have identified themselves as an ICE officer, right? So there needs to be some sort of identification.
but the
They
number,
can't come to church.
the number of times I open the door out here and walk in and see nobody for the first 10 minutes I'm in.
Oh, you mean if they just walk in the door
Yeah.
and just come in?
Yeah.
Would they do that?
Well, I think with
I mean, they would probably knock on the door and call out. I mean, they would have to do that. Is this a public
Yeah.
building? It is a public building.
It's a lot of
So then
public.
they
What
could-
about the concept of sensitive location?
So that's a policy, right?
No, I understand, but how often is that disregarded?
Unless they have a warrant, not usually. So, but we're talking in the terms of a warrant. So when there is a warrant, it's a public building, they can come in.
And how often does that happen though with these sensitive locations?
Not very often that I've heard of, no. Not in this area, not in New England.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm beginning to think that we're living back in the days of the fugitive slave law.
Yeah.
In the 1850s, when slaves who had escaped to Rhode Island and Massachusetts were held by the local police and turned back to their slave owners, who would then have them shipped back to South Carolina. I don't want to belong to a church that lives that kind of a style. If this should develop, and we should be fortunate enough to be approached by someone who needs harboring, and that we can be assured for the safety and welfare of our membership. Some guys with ice on their back show up at the door. First you call Steve. Then you
Steve's gonna be here.
Oh, yeah.
Steve's here.
You call every television program that you can get your hands on. You amass people, and if ICE wants to be caught on, shown on television, dragging people out of the First Unitarian Church, well, God bless us, we're doing the right thing.
Does ICE typically,
I think that's a decision as an organization that you all should make.
I guess the question there for me is, I mean, I've read about people living for 2 years or more in a church in Chicago. And I guess the question for me is, what can we really legitimately offer when we tell somebody that that we'll take them in and keep them here as long as we can? Are we setting them up with expectations that we can begin to follow through on?
Again, I think that that's, an organizational decision, right, that would need to be made, and one that needs to be considered in the context of this person's life, right? Because given sanctuary for somebody to come and live here and sleep here, does that mean they're not walking out the door ever? Right? Because if that ICE officer has a warrant and this person needs to go to CVS to pick up some prescription pills, that doesn't stop ICE. Right? So it's just being clear to whoever it is that you're offering sanctuary to say, while you're here, we will do all we can, and we will stop immigration to the extent that we can by law, and you will be safe here. We will do everything we can. Right? Understanding that there are laws and consequences to violation of those laws, and so long as you call the lawyer and then you call Steve, and while the lawyer's coming, Channel 10's here, and now you got the congregation here, and right, you got this whole thing going on. Hopefully the ICE officer will leave in between. You might have put that ICE officer at bay for a day, maybe two.
But that's it. Yeah.
Right, so it's about being realistic of what exactly you are offering. What are you offering? Are you saying to this person, we're going to take care of you, we're going to go pick up your prescriptions, we're going to provide you food, you don't have to leave this facility ever?
Right, but you could be offering time for adjudication of a case that might be winnable. I think that would be the goal.
one of the questions is about, I guess, the security of people walking in and out of this building. do ICE officers have to be recognizable?
Yes, so
They
there's.
cannot be undercover coming in? so
They're
you
not
know
generally
them.
undercover. I mean, there are officers that may be detectives for their investigation, but those are generally,
Not the ones carrying the warrant?
well, and not necessarily just those, but those are generally doing an investigation where there might be drugs involved. You know, they're not going to, they've never done that before. They've never gone in and plain clothes. I mean, this is all new territory for all of us, so.
It's just we have open doors and we'd like to identify who's coming in.
Usually, if they have a warrant, they'll have, you know.
But they could be dressed as a Providence police officer.
Yeah, because that just happened
I think that would cause even, because now you're talking about impersonation of a police officer, right? That's you're talking there, the federal officer. It would be state crime,
No, I'm talking about deputized
yeah.
local police.
But hopefully not.
So, yeah, I mean, hopefully, I don't think that that's gonna happen in Providence, I really don't, because our mayor has said that he's definitely not doing that, but we don't, this administration is in for 4 years, and I think Mayor Lorza's term is up next year, the year after, 2 years, I don't know. So, right, then we'll have another, if he doesn't get reelected, we have another 4 years, and God knows who's coming in, and then we have a governor, who, you know, so this president is gonna be here longer than the administration that we have now. Be that in Providence or the state, so we really need to be thinking about, you know, what does that look like then? But yes, if it was a police officer, but even the police officer would have to be in police officer clothing. So you're not talking about a detective who's coming in plain clothing, who's gonna come into the church here looking for a fugitive. I don't think, I mean, is it possible? I suppose. I mean, I don't think that that's the kind of thing that they're investigating. I would imagine they want a plainclothes detective to be working on more serious things than coming into a church to pick up somebody. Yes.
Digressing a little bit, but I need to ask the question. If I have a friend who's teaching someone English, an immigrant who's teaching English, and that immigrant confides to my friend that he or she is undocumented, is my friend subject to harboring and criminal prosecution?
If that is the criteria, then I need to be arrested. Because I do that every day, right? How many people come to me and say, I'm here undocumented? I don't believe so, right? Under this criteria, this requires somebody to actually conceal and shelter that person. So just teaching and knowing does not seem to rise to the level of actually harboring.
But better to be in a more or less public space than, say, doing that kind of thing in your own home?
I don't think that they're concealing, because concealing to me means that you're doing that for a period of time, right? You're not just that moment in time that that person is sitting in the living room learning English does not seem to be concealing, right? And concealing would require ICE to know that this concealing is going on, because you need to have the intent to actually conceal that person, and for that hour and a half that that English class is going on, I can't imagine that the teacher really thinks that he or she is concealing this foreign national, right? They're just teaching English. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've really gone on topic, although this was great discussion. I don't know where else to yes?
I'm remembering the sanctuary trial in Tucson. That's where I was for 15 years.
Wow.
And I was convener of the local sanctuary community, 13 congregations. And I'm very much aware that the feds paid to have 2 people infiltrate churches. And it really did terrible things to those churches when they realized that they'd been infiltrated. It wasn't one of ours. But we did have a break-in at our church, and I've never doubted this was our tax dollars at work.
Wow.
The back security window, which was extremely heavy, I couldn't break it, no matter what I did. They broke through it.
Wow.
They tried to kick the doors of my office down, didn't work. Tried to go through the wall, couldn't get through the wall. So they found a crawl space up into the attic over where my office was. But the architect, who was a member of a friend, had built the walls all the way up to the window. So they had to kick their ways through that wall and stomp their way down through the ceiling taking out a 6-foot light fixture. The only thing they took, since I never kept any records, the only thing they took was a rubber stamp with my name on it. Because that way they could prove they were in my office. Now the police said, oh, it must have been teenagers. No, teenagers don't do that. Federal tax dollars did that.
Wow.
So I would say, don't always believe the government is going to act honorably.
Yeah, no, I agree with you with that. I don't disagree with that statement. I don't think that they always act honorably.
Especially ICE.
Especially, yes.
I believe our insurance has said something about, we're covered if the person is here on a temporary basis. How would you define temporary basis?
So that's probably a question for the insurance company, because that would probably be on your insurance rider as to how they're defining temporary basis. I mean, a temporary basis in this scenario, I think can't be any less than 3 months. I don't think, or maybe even more in a situation like this. I mean, understand that removal cases, deportation cases go on for years. Years. I have cases now that aren't going to be until 2021. And I'm hoping that I'm going to go forward that day. Right, yeah. So, you know, harboring, I can't imagine, I mean, maybe you will, I don't know, that you'll harbor a person or you'll house a person for that long a period of time. But these cases take a really long time. I would imagine that the people that you probably would, so I think the question originally was, you know, what should the criteria be for providing sanctuary? And that's really, I think, a question for the organization itself. But the question, I think there's several, I think, that need to be answered. Number one is, what period of time is it that you plan to house the person or family or whoever it is?
Do you have an agreement or a lease? Because if you had a lease, the term would be in it.
You could, but then are you charging anything for the lease?
Not necessarily.
So then
It
if
could
you-
be an agreement. Let's not call it a lease, let's call it an agreement.
Well, I kind of like lease.
Okay.
Because if you call it a lease, then are you harboring?
The other question is, if you issue a lease and you're violating the zoning regulations by issuing a lease, it probably...
Okay, that's a different, now you're outside of my realm.
Yeah, I know, but I mean...
So that would be a zoning question, you'd have to ask a zoning
And
board.
that's the issue with the insurance company.
Oh, with issuing the lease. Okay.
So maybe we could give you an idea of what, so our organization already has guidelines of what we expect from someone who's going to come and be in sanctuary in our building if we do this. So we would have to, one of the criteria is that they be part of a family where the children are born here, they're citizens. And that they also need to be in process somehow. And so like the one example, the living example right now is in Denver, Colorado. There was a woman who knew that when she went for her hearing for a stay, that she probably was not going to get that stay because this was just after,
She already had their removal.
Right. So she went into sanctuary in the church, sent her lawyer and the pastor, and they said, no, she's not granted the stay. She needs to leave. So they said, nope, she's not leaving, she's in sanctuary, and we're still working on this and getting this in, continuing this on to see why she shouldn't be able to have a stay. Because, prior to this, she would have been able to just go on and continue her life as she had been, meeting her side of it. So the other side of it is that the people need to be public about this. So we're doing this as an act of faith. We're doing it to help other people. So as you're staying here, you're going to be very public about it. We're not harboring.
We're not hiding you.
We're not hiding you. You are going to say, this is my deal. This is why I'm here. This is why they put me here. This is wrong. So we're just holding a place for them while they're in process, and the process is happening. So So this is part of it. It's not just anybody who walks by on the street and says, help, this after me, whatever. So there are criteria they have to meet. So then we get into this whole thing, well, is this person going to be a resident here? What are the terms, what does the term resident mean?
Right.
They're just staying, we've been suggested that we could call a social invitee, they're just here for, until things are resolved, they're not actually a resident here. So there are a lot of...
You may not call it sanctuary either, then, if you're calling them a social invitee.
I mean, that's the church thing, is a sanctuary, churches have been called sanctuary, so it's part of the sanctuary movement that's happening. So it's not like anybody's just coming in here, anybody has like this big record, I mean, they have a record because they're undocumented.
Right.
But it's a very specific type of person, and we might find that nobody even wants to have that.
Right.
Although there are people who are already very public, like there may be DACA students who are very public, who down the line, they might be a target. And they might be somebody they're like, already public, doesn't matter, I just need to be someplace where I'm going to be safe.
So I think it's this notion of what does it mean to be safe, right? Because I teach at the university, and a lot of universities have come out saying that they're going to be sanctuary schools. That their students are going to be safe while they're in the school. What they've defined that to mean is if ICE came to the door wanting to know, are you holding somebody here, that you're not going to assist in any way, right? That you're going to say, I don't need to help you. And that's it. You're not answering no, because then you'd be violating the law. But you're not answering yes. And you're not answering anything, because you don't have to. And that would be your answer, right? And that's what schools are doing, what universities are doing. I assume that that's what your congregation would do too. So that since this is a public building, if ICE were to come in and say, we believe that you're holding Joe Schmo here, and they start looking around, because this is a public building, and they can, because it's a public building, and they don't find Joe Schmo, they leave and they're safe. Maybe because Joe Schmo is going to be in a location where the public is not allowed, because that might be a private location. Then he's safe. But if ICE shows up at the door with a warrant, and ICE is at the door and you have one of your members of the congregation, and now ICE says, we're here to pick up Joe Schmo because we know he's living here, now you're telling him, can I see the warrant? Is Joe Schmo's name on there? Is that the Joe Schmo that's actually here? Right, because there's a lot of Joe Schmoes out there. So maybe it's not the Joe Schmo that lives here. So you need to determine that. Was this order signed by a judge? Right, can't just be an order that says that a judge is going to sign it, but there's no signature on it. And it needs to be a warrant for the arrest of. And in the case like that, if you're asked, then the obligation is to say yes. The amount of time that that person actually stays here would certainly be dependent on what the process is and how it is that your criteria fits into that. What I would say to you in the situation of this person that's in Denver, not knowing a whole lot about it, just based on what you're telling me and what a stay means to me. So a stay to me means that somebody already has a removal order but has asked for permission to stay in the United States for whatever reason, an indefinite period of time. Usually stays are granted because of health reasons, because of children that live in the United States who may be in school, who need to finish their school year. And so that's generally when stays are granted. Not knowing what the situation of this woman in Denver is, as an attorney, if I'm filing a stay and my stay is denied, the only thing I'm doing is filing it again and hoping I don't get the same officer. That will change his mind because there is no appeal for that. Or going to immigration court again and asking the court to reopen the case somehow. That could take a really long time.
I think there was one other issue in this case, and that was that she was a victim of a crime.
Okay, so in that case then, right, if that was the case, then I would be applying for a U visa, right? So that she can get the U visa. U visas take at least 2 years, but if I know at least I have certification, the chances of her getting that stay should be better, because that's generally when they'll grant a stay. But that implies that the removal proceedings needs to be reopened, so there's a whole slew of legal issues that need to be determined. I think your criteria may want to be is there an attorney involved, right? Can we get an attorney involved? And, what is the attorney going to be able to do, and can the attorney give you a time frame as to what that looks like?
And what would happen, suppose, the person is here and ICE comes, they don't have the right documentation, and we were to say, because there's a whole other religious organization involved in this, hey, we have a feeling they're going to come looking for this person, and we were to move that person to another location, would that cause a problem for us?
So the statute says concealing or harboring. That I think would only be an issue if they came back here and said to you, do you know where he's at? And you said no.
But suppose we were to send him off, not with anybody from our congregation, and just, okay, we don't know.
You could say, we asked him to leave because we were concerned for his safety, and we don't really know where he would have gone. I mean, you don't have to tell them that you told him to go because you don't know if he went. Right? You can give advice to people, doesn't mean they always follow it.
Or if we told another church to come and get him and put him somewhere.
It's unclear. If you know that church actually took him and you're not giving them that information, you've now concealed, but to the extent that you don't know. And you also, as U.S. citizens, have the right to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent against self-incrimination. To say anything would be to incriminate yourself. You have the right to remain silent.
Do you have any clear distinction between a fugitive and a felon?
Yes, a fugitive is somebody, in my mind, as somebody who has been arrested for some sort of crime and has not answered to it. Or someone who
has a warrant out.
Has a warrant out and has not complied with the warrant, right? Hasn't appeared in court. A felon is just somebody who's committed a felony, right? So possession of cocaine in Rhode Island is a felony. You're in possession of cocaine, you're in a felony.
Well, if you're convicted.
If you're convicted of it, correct.
Indirect convict.
Yes. You could be a convict. Although we think of convicts as people who actually served time. So if you didn't serve time, a convicted felon, I don't know. Yes.
I was under the impression that someone was talking about the sanctuary movement within the church as making it publicly known who the person was who we were giving sanctuary to. Is that something that we should or should not do?
So if you were to do that, you certainly wouldn't be concealing the person in any way.
If we did,
Are you making them on target?
You might be.
Yeah.
but then I would have more reason to come after
Yes.
with a warrant.
Because they know.
Yeah.
Right. But what I think what the difference is making it public and making it secret are two different things, right? Making it public is, calling Steve here and having him post it on his website and now everybody's gonna know, right? That's different than saying, if somebody asked me, I would tell them. If they don't ask me, I don't need to tell them. But if I was to be asked, then I would say it, because it's not a secret. Right, but that doesn't mean, just because you didn't put it out in the media, that it's not public.
But I could also be silent.
You could be silent.
I don't have to answer.
Yes, and if you're in a meeting with, an alliance of churches, and now the conversation goes to, do you guys have anybody? And you say, yeah, I got Joe Schmo staying at my place. That's public now, right? Because now you've put it out there. So there's a difference between public and secret. Secret means you're not telling anybody. You're keeping it to yourself. Public means you would tell anybody who would ask you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put it in the media. You don't need to call the media.
And you think that we shouldn't put it in the media?
I don't think that benefits you. I don't think that benefits them. I think it puts this church in scrutiny. think it really, there's a lot of people out there that are not happy about this situation. I receive very nasty emails because I'm a terrible person and I don't know what I'm talking about most of the time. And so, right, and so why would you want that? Why would you want people standing outside or even coming into your church with signs or saying horrible things? I personally don't think that that's probably the right way of doing it. But I think if somebody were to ask you and you wanted to say, it's not a secret. This is, the Unitarian Church is going to be a sanctuary church, and if somebody asks us for it, we're going to give it. But you don't have to publicize that and putting it on the media.
Right.
There's a difference.
If I could suggest that you call the media when ICE shows up, and that's when you make the big statement, call the people who are willing to get arrested and stand in front of the door and stuff. That's the time to make a big scene when it's already revealed. Before then, there's no reason for it to.
I agree with that.
Right.
Well, like the church in Denver, I mean, it was a huge, I don't remember what, there was a big story about it. It was, and they haven't.
Oh, yeah, a sanctuary church.
Right. Yeah.
So did they come out first? I don't know enough about this.
Yes.
They came out first.
They've been a sanctuary church, and they had someone in sanctuary for 9 months before.
They fundraised for it publicly.
Right. The issue was resolved, and so they remained a sanctuary church. This was someone who had worked with them, and she knew what she was getting into. It was covered by media nationally. They have had protesters outside of their church. They've had to have people be at the church hall. We would have to have someone be here just for protection anyway, until that, until such a point where it could die down. It might or it might not. They said after a few months, things generally have died down.
I would imagine that to be true in just about any scenario. I mean, we all get hot-blooded about things, and then a couple of weeks goes by and we all moved on to the next thing. So I think that's certainly an organizational question, but one that I think you need to consider, considering that not everybody thinks the way we think about these things in this room.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there who are out to hurt people, and so it's a consideration. Plus, you have a beautiful building. Do you want to risk your building? Yeah. Well, I don't know that I've answered all of your questions, but we've completely gone off topic, so now I've completely lost my mojo. If there's just any other questions that I can...
Yeah, I think it's been very relevant for us
good.
and helpful in answering questions that we have.
Good, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything have anything else?
Anything else you can possibly... I can't think of anything that I want to speak to you about. I think a lot of when we think about sanctuary, we generally think about in the terms of cities funding, what does that mean for, feds commandeering state resources and things like that. And in churches, that's usually not the case, because churches don't receive federal funds.
I have a question for you. Since you work with the immigrant community all of the time, do you see a need for this, or do you see that there might be a need for this? And do you think that it's a worthwhile endeavor? Or are we just, it looks good, but this is not what people from the immigrant community actually need?
I think people are scared. I think what people need is support, personally. This is me speaking. I think what people need is a place they can call, a place they can go when something happens. Who can I call if I get arrested? Who can I call if my kids are, what happens to my kids if I get detained and nobody can take care of my kids? Right, that's, I think, where a lot of people think the need is. What's going to happen to families if they are in fact separated? But I don't discard this desire to want to house somebody in the event that it becomes necessary. I don't think that that's outside of the realm of things that could be happening in Rhode Island. What I will say is that right now, we as immigration lawyers, we've all been assured that ICE in the New England area is not necessarily enforcing this executive order as of yet because they don't have the resources to do it. And so we've been assured that they're still working, even though these are the priorities, they themselves have their own priorities, and their priorities are the criminals. I do know of a lot of people who have crimes, who have removal orders, who have been picked up. So I also know that I've seen an increase in that. But those are things to be expected. Those people were going to be picked up. They already had a criminal record, they already had a removal order, there's nothing anybody can do for them more likely than not, so they're being picked up. Those people, I think, depending on what the crime was, should be picked up. So I've seen that, but I haven't seen them just pick up anybody just because they're in removal proceedings. In fact, I've had several clients of my own actually report to ICE because they're on an order of supervision or they're having to report and they have not been detained. They go in, they report, and they've been let go. And that's been, all of my colleagues have reported the same thing. Yeah, and so, yeah. But even people who have removal orders are doing that. I had a woman that I met with today, has a removal order, came in, they put her on an order of supervision. She reported in December, doesn't have to report again until December, so they gave her a whole year. So yeah, so I think in this area, in the New England area at least, our ICE officials here realize they have no place to detain these people. Where are they going to put these people? We don't have enough detention facilities. ICE no longer does business with Wyatt, so it's not like they're going to detain them in Wyatt anymore. They're not going to do that. It would have to be at the Bristol, Dartmouth House of Corrections in the Bristol County House of Corrections in Dartmouth.
So there is no detention center in Rhode Island?
No.
So when did they close?
Wyatt is still open, so it's a federal detention facility for federal criminals, but immigration no longer houses right there. So they would have to go to either Bristol County, Dartmouth, or they'd have to go to Suffolk, or Plymouth County in Cape Cod. But even those facilities, I mean, there's just not enough beds. And so we're not seeing that here. I would imagine that once the budget gets approved, if they ever approve this ridiculous budget that he's proposed, then I would probably venture to say that that would change. But for now, since the budget hasn't been approved, and I'm hopeful that, cooler heads or smarter heads will prevail in Congress, that this budget is not going to pass the way it is.
So as far as you know, nobody in this area has been picked up and detained, because there had been a story that there was a husband and wife who were sent to Dartmouth.
No.
You haven't heard anything about that?
No.
Okay.
There was a gentleman that was picked up in New York from this area. So I spoke to, in fact, I had spoken to his wife or girlfriend or significant other. And he was working in New York, in Buffalo, and was stopped in a car, some sort of traffic violation, and he got picked up. But he got picked up by New York police in Buffalo, so not in this area. So I don't think that that's happening here just yet. And I don't think our state police are doing anything about that either. Our governor hasn't come out, but I'm guessing she hasn't come out because she doesn't want to lose federal funding. But I don't think that I have not heard her ever yet speak that she plans to participate in 287G.
She came here and said that she wants to be like Canada. She wants Rhode Island to be like Canada, but who can just come here.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah,
so I like that.
so,
So then hopefully she won't participate.
That's speaking in front of a bunch of Unitarians. But
Yeah, but I think that's important,
Yeah.
right? Because if she comes out and says that to you all, then if she were to do something else, you'd all say, oh my God, she's a liar, I'm not going to vote for her next time. Right? And she's looking for your vote because she's looking for you to convince your friends to vote for her because based on what she's saying. So, yeah, I don't know. I like to think that she's more liberal than that. I like to think that. Even though she promised driver's licenses to the undocumented. Yeah.
And what do you see that we could do to help that? I mean, we know we need to show up at the State House. I mean, are there other things that we could do to help? Driver's licenses is one big thing. We know that's something that needs to be.
I think there's legislation that was introduced.
Yeah.
Was introduced today.
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
The Senate, Senator Ciccone just introduced it today.
Introduced it. Oh, good.
Ciccone, thank you.
Yeah.
The driver's license?
Yeah, driver's license. He just had a press conference for it today.
Oh, okay. Go take the project. But yeah, so I think just going, showing up, testifying if you can, if you want to say something positive about it. I mean, myself with Latino Policy Institute in my clinic, we wrote a report on providing driver's licenses to the undocumented population. And based on our research, and this is facts and numbers, it's not because I'm an immigration officer or an immigration attorney that I think this, but based on the numbers and the facts, it's been proven that states that have given driver's licenses to the undocumented population generally see growth in their economy, generally see less traffic fatalities, generally see insurance rates decrease. So it really only makes sense for us to do that as a state. And that's not me saying it because I'm an immigration lawyer or whatever. This is what the numbers show. And so when I say that to people, people look at me and say, oh, you're an immigration lawyer, you want this. Yeah, I want this, but the numbers show that this is the right thing to do too, so.
Face-to-face talk with your representatives.
Yes. And I'll tell you, not the representatives in Providence, right? We need to get to the South.
With representatives throughout the state, yeah.
Can I ask about the driver's licenses? I brought that up at a meeting last night, and one of the participants said, oh yeah, but now they don't want to give their information to the DMV because then ICE will get it. But if we don't cooperate with ICE, then they wouldn't necessarily get it.
Right.
Okay, so people could still apply for licenses?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. And under this, the proposal that Ciccone put out, he put it out last year's,
And Natty Yellow killed it though. Is that going to happen again?
It died last year. Yeah, it's not going to go through, but it's up there, yes. Yeah. It needs a lot of work to get it through. It would have to be pushed hard.
I mean, honestly, I don't know how much harder they could push it because that legislation is really moderate when you compare it to other states.
Exactly.
I mean, they're requiring 2 years of tax returns. Somebody who's paid tax returns in the state of Rhode Island for 2 years is invested. They are here. They live here. So I don't know how much more. I mean,
The state has their information already.
Right. They've provided the tax returns. The state already has the info, so why not provide them? But, I could argue about that all day.
Yes.
Anyway. Any other questions that I might answer?
Well, if the budget passes as, they're suggesting, and then, so they would have to hire all sorts of new ICE agents, and there would have to be, like, how long would all that take, all that training?
So that's interesting, right? Because we were talking about, well, first of all, where did the money come from? And so I don't work for Congress. Honestly, I've never really paid attention to this stuff until recently. Because even though I didn't like Bush a lot, I thought he certainly wasn't this guy. And so, I really pay attention to this stuff because I think this really affects all of us. And so, where's the money coming from and how quickly is that going to be disseminated to make this ridiculous wall, to hire all these officers? What about the training for these officers? And then how are we actually working all of that? And, I would imagine that's going to take at least a year or two, depending on where the money comes from. Like, do they stop Meals on Wheels immediately? And really, does the money from Meals on Wheels, is that enough to pay for this? Like, come on, I just don't see it.
And even historically, Obama's budget has passed, and it doesn't really matter, right? Like, they outline all of these things that they're gonna do with it, and it kind of...
It's whatever they want.
Yeah,
it's unclear exactly where all the money is going for. Yeah, we don't really know.
With all the corruption.
Well, yeah.
Maybe things will not even actually get done.
They call it the pork brines, or the pig ears, or the pork ears, or whatever you call it.
Pork barrel.
Pork barrel? What is it?
Pork barrel.
Making sausage.
The sausage. Yeah, it's something that's completely not,
Earmarks.
earmarks.
No, it isn't.
It's pork something.
Pork something.
Yes,
Pork
when I
barrel.
first,
Pork barrel.
barrel, or pork barrel, is that what it is?
Pork
Okay. So like when I heard the term, I thought, what?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.